Hey everyone, welcome back to a new video. Before I begin on the stories, I just wanted to mention, if you have your own personal scary story that you would like to send me for me to possibly narrate here on the channel, you can do so by sending it to southerncannibal.com. So if you have a personal true scary story that you'd like to share, please consider sending it my way. Now that all that's out of the way, let's begin. Hi, I'm Frank. I have been a nurse in a child hospital for 7 years now. Before that, I worked as a nurse assistant in different places, mostly psychiatric clinics or centers for the disabled. At the time, I had just switched from taking care of elders at home to night shifts. My girlfriend wasn't my wife yet. We didn't live together, and we thought it would let us have a lot of spare time to see each other. Now, if you never did night shifts, it looks fair and square on plan, but I can tell you that staying awake for 10 hours and bearing responsibilities when your mind tells you every 5 minutes to take a nap, it's really hard. On the other hand though, the paychecks are good. So basically I moved from place to place every 2 months or so. That way it was easier not to get bored and avoid sleeping on the job. Because sadly, that's what happens once you're used to the ward, the patients, and the facilities. You end up being clumsy, and eventually, you unconsciously allow yourself to pass out. For about 20 minutes at first, for 2 hours afterwards. Hopefully I never reached that point. Anyways, I started working in a psychiatric ward. It was beside the hills in the far east of the city. The neighborhood was extremely quiet and poshy. You could tell it by the number of maligners and sports cars parked everywhere near the big villas. The psychiatric hospital itself was shabby, and parts were grossly rebuilt. It seemed misplaced with all those fancy houses around, kinda like a gaping scar on the face of a model. I thought that there would be 2 people at night, like it's a common thing. But in this ward, they only put 1 staff member at night. It was shaped like a cross with the infirmary desk at the center. The 6 first nights I spent there were okay. The patients were asleep when I arrived. There wasn't too much to do with the treatments, and except taking out some trash, it clearly was some well-paid lazy time. The 3rd night, I remember the day shift talking about a patient who ran away. But I didn't pay too much attention because this happens frequently. Actually, it really depends on the way the patient is checked in. It needs 2 signatures. One from the shrink who diagnosed the mental illness, and also one from the doctor who decided to put him in the hospital. Way too often, the first one forgets to sign the file bill, and the hospital has to send a notice to the local medical court. Some cases take 7 months to be read in court. So if the patient bailed out himself during that time, the hospital isn't in charge to take him back. The staff is never anxious about that, because 85% of them come back within like a week. The other 15%, well, they're still a bit of a mystery for me. On that night, I had just checked all the overdoor alarms with my keys, before then heading to the infirmary to have a cup of coffee. From the moment I took the shift, something wasn't feeling as usual. The patients that I visited to give the treatments were strangely silent. No laughing or joking. From 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., I had checked 6 times behind furnitures and sofas. It was like someone was following me from a short distance and stopped in the dark when I looked back. I was coming back from the trash containers when I came across the living room. The couch had blackish stains on it, and I was certain that wasn't there when I arrived at 9 p.m. Furthermore, I found a green shirt on the floor with the exact same blackish stains on it. I decided to come back in the infirmary and lock myself in until 6 a.m. When I came back to the infirmary desk, I found a chair blocking the door from the inside. When I looked by the big glass window, I didn't see anything at first. Nothing. And then, I only saw 1 bare foot and a bit of pants because of the angle. But a person was hiding right under the desk. As I didn't know who it was and what intentions he or she had, I decided to call the security guard patrolling outside. On the phone, he told me he witnessed a guy running in the park towards the building, but that he was sure he was hiding in a ditch around the garden. I told him the guy was actually inside, so he replied that he'd be there soon. That was the longest 25 minutes of my life. I called the head nurse, and she arrived within 5 minutes after the security guard. At some point, the person moved the chair, but they caught him. It was the same patient that escaped 3 days ago. He was shirtless and covered in the same blackish stains from head to toe. Well, they found out that it was shit. Yeah, he actually shit himself multiple times. What they didn't tell me, and what I learned from a colleague 2 weeks after, is that they found a piece of wood with a shard of glass attached to it in one of his pockets. Yeah, pretty crazy stuff. I would like to preface the story with very specific trigger warnings. The triggers consist of CSA, General SA, mentions of suicide, mentions of substance abuse, medical horror/psychological horror, and since this is a psych ward story, this is generally an overall trigger to some people. I'm currently an 18-year-old transgender male, but this happened at around age 12 when I was in the 7th grade. I had already begun to deal with a variety of health issues, along with experiencing severe gender dysphoria, but the biggest thing for me was that my mental health had crashed and burned due to the events of my life at the time. For some backstory, my mother is a recovering alcoholic, and at the time, there was a lot of built-up anger towards her. It's safe to say that our relationship as of now is absolutely wonderful, but her actions when I was a child severely impacted my early teen years. Her alcoholism had gotten so bad that my father had threatened to file for sole custody of me, as well as my twin sibling if she didn't sober up. She did, but a year after it ended, my parents divorced with not even a single visit from a lawyer. It was a very civil divorce considering what they went through. But little did my parents know at the time that I was being tormented in the hallways of my school. She was the main catalyst for so many of my problems in my teen years. It was when I was in my math class with a pair of scissors that I realized I needed to get help. So I called my dad, who called my current therapist, who called my mom, who drove me to the hospital for placement in an inpatient facility. Now, there's so many common misconceptions about psychiatric wards, and over the course of my life, I cannot stress this enough. Psych wards are not therapeutic. The real work is done outside in your daily life with a licensed therapist, not within the walls of a psych ward. Well, the short-term ones anyways. They exist to make sure you don't kill yourself or anybody else, and then let you back out when the overworked, single psychologist deems you fit enough to re-enter society. Outpatient programs are genuinely helpful to those who don't really need to be in the hospital for more than a few days. When I got to the main hospital, I thought I would be staying there. The doctor had asked me questions about why exactly I felt that I needed to be admitted to the hospital, and it was determined by the end of it that I did. The reputation of that hospital's psych ward conditions for adolescents and children is actually quite good, so I was hoping to be admitted there. But I was not. I was told I was being transferred to somewhere that I hadn't even heard of at the time. But since all the legal proceedings are over with this place, I don't even care. The hospital I was sent to was named Holly Hill Mental Health Center. 1.1 stars on Google. You can look it up. We actually have a support group about it. But anyways, we had no choice but to have me go there. The minute I was admitted, I was dragged into a room and told to strip. All of my belongings were taken and essentially cut open to see if there were any weapons. It took my mother days to sew my things back up. They grabbed my arms, legs, general torso, and hair to see if there were any fresh cuts or marks. Now, here's where the legal aspect comes in. I have to wear a patch on my side by my ribs for my lungs. I have a condition from birth where my lungs are still extremely premature, and at the time, in my 12-year-old body, they were about the size of a 7-year-old's. The best way I can describe it is one of those insulin patches, but with steroids and medication for my lungs. They ripped it out and then started screaming at me for having drugs going directly into my body like that. And they weren't too far off. It's just the fact that I would die without them. They threw the bag of clothes I had at me and stayed in the room as I got dressed, before dragging me to another room. Over the course of the week, I was berated, given antipsychotics that made me have a seizure-like reaction, groped by one of the nurses, strapped down, and forced to tell the tech why I was lying to the psychologist about my estranged uncle and what he did to me as a child. My parents weren't allowed to take me out of the hospital, and I was sexually assaulted by 2 of the male patients and then told it never happened. I was denied my medication that I was already on, denied my steroids, denied food, and denied phone calls. My parents tried visiting me every single day, and the final day I was there, I absolutely busted out of the place. My parents saw my condition. I was only in a sports bra on my pants. My side was bleeding and infected from my steroids being torn out, and I was covered in bug bites, rashes, and bruises from my stay there, along with pink eye. That day, my parents had brought papers to forcefully remove me from the custody of the hospital, and my mother grabbed me, wrapping me in a blanket, telling me it was going to be okay and that she's so sorry she couldn't save me before. Putting my headphones on and taking me outside as my father then screamed at the techs and doctors. I had packed up all my stuff to keep it safe from the bugs, so my dad was able to grab my bag and get out of there as well. I was safely taken to the hospital where my mom was the financial manager of and properly treated for my injuries, having a kit done on me as well. My steroids were directly injected in bulk, so my lungs wouldn't collapse as I spoke to my parents' lawyer. There are many stories of my interactions with the health industry, but this by far was the worst and most terrifying. It's safe to say this ending is bittersweet though, since the hospital in question is still in business, but there was a huge payout towards my family. This was also the time where my parents set aside their personal disagreements with each other and spent an entire week working together to get me out of there. My final message is this: parents, please, you have the power to refuse sending your child to certain hospitals for psychiatric purposes. Please do your research before you do anything. I'm a registered psychiatric nurse working the night shift at an extremely acute inpatient psychiatric hospital in my state. Just to give a very basic image of the types of patients we treat, I will share some of the more common diagnoses that I regularly see. Our admissions usually consist of patients with acute antisocial personality disorder, intermittent explosive disorder, as well as individuals suffering from psychosis secondary to substance abuse, typically methamphetamines, heroin, fentanyl, and more. More commonly than that, we see patients with acute schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorders, bipolar disorders, people with depression, people with suicidal and homicidal ideations, as well as patients with any combination of the above, and much, much more. I could probably spend an hour going over all the diagnoses that we treat, but what I've shared should be enough to lay out a basic foundation of our hospital. With that said, it's safe to say that our staff sees our fair share of violence against self and others, and bizarre behaviors. We never ever have a dull or boring shift at work. For example, just under a year ago, one of our floor nurses suffered a brain bleed / concussion because she had simply walked behind a patient who was using the unit telephone, who was apparently having a bad conversation with whoever was on the other line. The patient on the phone just happened to turn around, happened to see that nurse passing by him, and he decided to take that opportunity to randomly slam that poor nurse's head against the wall. Literally, that nurse could have died just because she was at the wrong place at the wrong time. Thankfully, she recovered fully and is still employed at our hospital today. and that patient is rightfully in prison. But that just goes to show you how dangerous and unpredictable some of these patients can be. The story I'm about to share is a little different, because it occurred when I was reviewing patient charts in the safety of our enclosed nurses station. But it was still disturbing enough to remind me that we truly can't trust everyone we encounter casually outside of our houses. We never really know a stranger's true intentions. Anyway, here it goes. I had been on shift maybe an hour or so, and I was getting ready to prepare my patient's evening medications for that night. I was pulled away from my desk when the phone rang. When the phones in the nurse's station rings, it's typically another member of staff such as doctors, pharmacists, house supervisors, etc. But occasionally, general inquiry phone calls would get routed to the inpatient units at night. I answered the phone, anticipating to hear one of our residential psychiatrist's voices, but instead, I was greeted with the voice of a man completely unfamiliar to me.
Yeah, hello there. I had a couple of questions regarding your admission process that I was hoping you could help me with.
In my head, I was already searching for an opportunity to transfer this caller to our psych emergency services, keeping in mind that I had 8 patients to medicate, but I assured the caller I would help him to the best of my ability. He then went on to say,
I'm looking to be admitted as an inpatient, but I did have a question. I've developed some coping skills to help with my depression and anxiety, and these coping skills are nothing like drugs or anything like that. But I was just wondering if you all let your patients use their own found coping skills to help them while in your facility.
This question alone was bizarre to me, because people who are looking to be admitted to our facility are typically experiencing a mental health crisis and are unaware of such things as coping skills. So, with some caution already blaring in my mind, I responded back with, well, we do encourage our patients to utilize coping skills to help them self-regulate, but I'm curious to know what coping skill you're specifically referring to. In the calmest, most nonchalant voice imaginable, the man said,
Well, I masturbate frequently. That's my coping skill. It really helps me relax and eases my depression. Is masturbation allowed in your facility?
Completely taken aback and disgusted and ready to get this caller off the phone, I told him, we don't have any private rooms here. That is honestly something you would want to bring up with the attending physician when you come in to be evaluated. Now, admittedly, I should have hung up the phone on this guy right then and there, but I gave the caller the benefit of the doubt because honestly, we have 5 patients to a large room, and getting complaints of someone having a little spank-bang time under their covers at night is nothing unfamiliar to me. So I played devil's advocate, telling myself that maybe this dude was genuinely asking. I think that the caller could hear the change in my voice and demeanor, because he hurriedly changed the subject to other things regarding the admission process, such as what kind of items he can bring in with him, and how long does a patient typically stay. Blah blah blah. I assumed that once the caller could hear my tone return to normal, he got the courage to once again be a total weirdo by carrying on with,
So a few years ago, I was admitted to an inpatient detox center, and they had me do a body check. Do you guys have your patients do body checks when they get admitted?
No, a body check is a normal part of an inpatient admission process. We typically ask the patient to disrobe down to their underwear, so that we, the staff, can mark down and assess any marks or scars or tattoos on a patient's body, as well as to ensure that no contraband is being brought into the unit. But again, knowing what a body check is definitely not common public knowledge, so I really should have known that this guy was up to something. But in the middle of the moment, I just responded to him back by saying, yeah, a body check is a requirement because of A, B, and C. And he went on to say,
Okay, great, because I'm a man with a very large penis, and I was really curious to know if I could request you to measure it for me during the body check, since it's so big.
I threw the phone down so fast it was unreal. I felt so stupid for letting the call drag on to that point, and out of shock, I slowly turned around in my chair to face the 2 male mental health techs who were present with me in the nurse's station. One of them said to me in a laughing tone, What happened? You always sound so professional on the phone, but you dropped the phone down like it was a hot potato at the end there. I told him all about the story of what the guy on the phone was saying, and his eyes were as wide as saucers. The tech then said, "What the fuck? You should have given the phone to me so I could have talked to him." The other tech present with me said, "I swear if he calls back again, I'm gonna talk to that perv. If the phone rings again, do not answer it." My mystery caller never did call back again that night, although I was kind of hoping he would, because I was so curious to see what he would have done if one of our male staff answered the phone. Looking back, I find it so weird that the caller just knew the right things to say about the body check, the coping skills, and so on. It also makes me wonder if he was a previous patient here at one time. But again, the voice was entirely unfamiliar to me. He was also very well spoken and eloquent. Aside from the creeper things he said, his voice gave off no other creeper or pervert vibes. There was also complete radio silence in the background, and not a hint of a giggle or laugh in his voice, making it highly unlikely that this was a prank call. I genuinely think this guy got off on fantasizing about his totally disgusting psych ward admission fun made-up fantasy. It's so disturbing to even think about. Moving a bit forward though, as I said, he never did call back again that night. However, about 3 times since then, I've gotten phone calls at work from a man just breathing deeply on the phone and not saying anything. It's cheesy, and a total 90s horror movie cliche, I know, but it is still an unpleasant phone call to receive on a line that is typically reserved for professional communication. I'm not really sure if the breathing calls are from the same guy asking to be, well, measured, or if it's another Psych Ward alumni. But either way, it's a strange coincidence. To conclude, I'll just say that these phone calls have reminded me that just because we encounter seemingly normal people, it doesn't mean that they have good intentions, or even that they're completely mentally stable. It just really reminds me that not everyone is as kind or innocent as they seem, because even the most seemingly pleasant people could have lewd, horrible thoughts and ideas. The person checking your groceries at the grocery store, the person walking their dog that you pass on the jogging trail, the person who answers your phone call when you call customer service. You just never know. Be safe out there, friends. And remember, keep taking your medication, even if you are feeling better.